Ashley, thank you for your welcome. I'm a member of the NCRI Children's Cancer and Leukemia Clinical Studies Group, and I'll explain what that is as we go along. I'm presenting today really in place of Meryl Jenny, who's the chair of the group, and who couldn't make it today, so asked me to present on her behalf. So I'm grateful to her for the slide set that she's made available and that I've modified a little bit as we go along. So this is meant to be a reasonably light session, but just to understand what the NCRI is, what the NCRI CSG is, and how clinical trials happen through that. So the NCRI is the National Cancer Research Institute, and it's the reason for its existence is because, as we all, I hope, know in the audience here, that research is critical for improving outcomes in cancer. And what was historically the position was that there were many different funding bodies across the UK that funded cancer, but they were all doing their own thing and not really being brought together in a coordinated way. So in 2000, the NHS Cancer Plan proposed improving the links between funders of cancer research, and it was for that reason that the NCRI was born in 2001. And around the same time, the clinical cancer networks were established across the country to actually facilitate the delivery of research at a local level. And not too many statistics, but there's been a real benefit to the UK from the establishment of the NCRI. We've seen an increase in the number of patients entering clinical trials. So previously, the number of adults in clinical trials was very poor, but in 2011, the statistics show that 23% of all patients with cancer in the UK entered clinical trials, which is really a big improvement. And the other aspect has been there's been a dramatic improvement in commercial funding for clinical trials in cancer in the UK, and pharma are wanting to bring their research to the UK because of the infrastructure and the record on trial delivery that we now have. So what is NCRI? NCRI, it's a partnership of UK cancer research funders, as shown on here. So there are charities. A number of them are given here, and we've got many of them represented here. There are the 4 health departments from the 4 countries within the United Kingdom. There are 3 research councils and the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry. And these are all brought together to try and facilitate cancer research. And the NCRI is all about facilitation. It's not about funding. It doesn't fund research, but it facilitates organisations working together to promote research. So the partner organisations I've just mentioned on the last slide, other funders, the research networks, the specialty associations, the Royal Colleges, and a number of others as well. And the aim is to coordinate and collaborate to try and tackle important research questions in cancer to improve the rate of progress. So there are 4 core activities within NCRI. So we're going to be talking mostly about the clinical studies groups, but in addition to that, there's the research database, which tracks the research going on and the funding for research. There's an annual cancer conference, which brings together cancer researchers and all the partners, NCRI partners, once a year. And the idea there is to promote collaboration, discussion, promotion of research, and to showcase research as well. There are a number of clinical trials units, and I think Pam's spoken to you this morning about drug development in children, and I'm sure she's mentioned the Birmingham Clinical Trials Unit, which is the major trials unit that we deal with for our children's cancer trials. And then, of course, we have the clinical studies groups. So there are 20 clinical study groups, and I've just highlighted that the Children's Cancer and Leukemia group is one of the 20, but there's also a teenage and young adult group here. And the majority of the rest are site-specific, colorectal, prostate, sarcoma, etc. And linked with these, there are 3 advisory groups: molecular biomarkers, imaging, screening, prevention, early diagnosis. These are not formal CSGs, but they're advisory groups. So what the groups do? Well, I think the first important thing is that they're multidisciplinary. So they have a number of clinicians, scientists, and importantly, patient representatives. So Danielle is part of the children's CSG and then links into organisations such as Port. They drive the development of clinical studies for specific cancer types or for specific treatment approaches. Things like considering new research questions, developing proposals for studies that will answer the questions, securing funding for the studies and tracking their progress. And as we said, there are 20, and there's a children's cancer and leukemia CSG. So they've been in existence for more than 10 years now, since the NCRI came into existence, and they're a central part of the cancer research infrastructure now in the UK. And this is a I haven't got a proper heading on here, but this shows improvements in children's survival in the UK by era. So as we go through the time eras, the survival has improved. And of course, that's not only due to research. It's due to things like improvement in supportive care and establish sort of improved clinical networks and so on and so forth. But research is an important component of improving survival, and so it needs to continue. But there are a number of challenges to children's cancer research, and you've probably rehearsed a number of these today, and forgive me if this is a duplicate, because I wasn't here for most of the day. But obviously, cancer is rare in children and young people, so you have to have effective networks to collaborate in clinical trials. We've now got the European Clinical Trial Regulation. I'm sure somebody's mentioned that across the day today, and it's very necessary, but it provides quite a lot of complexity to the way we run our trials now. We need access to new drugs. I'm sure Pam touched on that this morning, and that's a particular issue for children. And funding issues are complicated, and we need to collaborate together to do research and sometimes to get funding. So these are some fun slides, really, that Meryl gave me, just to try and demonstrate the bureaucracy that sometimes goes with clinical trials. So this was, the Euromos trial was a trial in osteosarcoma, and there were 4 different groups involved in this. So the American group, the European group, Scandinavian group, and the sort of German group, with a coordinating data centre in the UK. And then there was all the other sort of associated the countries come in there, and the safety desks and so on here, so it gets a bit more complicated in terms of the structure you need for the trial. And then you've got the funding that goes in to fund the trial, and it goes out for funding the trial, if that makes sense. Sorry, there's too many lines here, I'll just skip through. But then you've got the drug supply, which is coming from Schering-Plough to the different countries to support the trial. So you can see, the point of this is not the detail, but just to show that it's incredibly complicated to run these trials. And there were 2 big groups that needed to coordinate together, the UK clinical trials group and the children's oncology group in the USA. So there we go, spare a thought for the clinical trial coordinator, because it's really quite complicated to do these things. So just a few more slides. How do clinical trials happen, and what's the role of the CSG in that? Well, again, this was one of Meryl's slides. It's true that often the ideas for trials start over a beer or a glass of wine at one of the European working groups, or perhaps in a more formal structure as well. But usually it's written on the back of an envelope, just the ideas jotted down. But of course, that's just the beginnings. And then you need to get together the right people, so oncologists, surgeons, perhaps radiation oncologists, the radiologists, to agree an outline proposal. And once you've got something, the outline there, you then have to take that to the national groups and to get approval from the national groups. And that's a really important part of the whole thing, because that allows discussion and modification. And of course, when we're doing trials in Europe, there may be many different European countries involved, so there may be many different national groups that we need to seek approval from. So there's quite a long process of modification and before we sort of finally get to what we think is a final trial design. And then, of course, on top of that, you have to identify a sponsor for the trial, you have to identify funding for the trial, you write and rewrite the protocol, you have to seek approval by the competent authorities. So where the NCRI clinical study groups comes in this is one of the national groups from which we need to seek approval. So any study coming through UK has to be approved through the NCRI Children's Cancer and Leukemia Clinical Study Group. And that's done by a presentation at one of the regular meetings, and a lot of discussion, maybe modification, but nothing can go forward in the UK for funding or sponsorship without that being done. And then it's only really after, in the UK, if we're putting trials through, it's really only after the NCRI CSG has approved things that we can then take things forward and go as far as seeking approval by the competent authorities through ethics and through the MHRA, the Medicines Regulatory Body. So you'll see from, and this is just a quick run through, but you'll see that certainly in the UK, the clinical study group is absolutely key as a step in this sort of process. And the bits down the bottom, particularly, is, the talking to the sponsor and then going forward to approval, just can't happen. Neither can the funding happen without approval from the group. And there's a benefit to trials from being NCRI badged as well, in the sense that there's potentially more funding available for trial aspects being delivered in the local centres. So it's not just the children's CSG that's relevant. So, for example, at the moment I'm dealing with a study in relapse rhabdomyosarcoma, and it's been through the children's CSG. But because it's a sarcoma study, it's also had to go to the sarcoma clinical study group. But it might be that the studies need to go to the TYA group, or to, for example, the germ cell group, or lymphoma group, or the haematology group, the adult groups. So there's agreement from the other relevant groups in the NCRI before it goes forward. I think I'm almost there. Just to say that as well as looking at trials that have come through, for example, European groups or UK initiatives that go to the NCRI CSG for approval, the CSGs can also identify research questions and try and move things on there. So this is just a sort of schema here. So potentially you can identify research questions within the CSG that are relevant, discuss areas of need and opportunity with NCRI partners, and that's the benefit of the big collaboration that NCRI is. It brings people together. And the consumer, or in our case, sort of parent and patient input is fabulous, fabulously important in that. Find out what's worked before, what others are doing, and come up with new ideas as to how to tackle it. So the NCRI is actually really important in progressing children's cancer research, and all cancer research indeed, within the UK. So my final slide, why does it matter? Well, what we're trying all to do, isn't it? I think parents and clinicians and scientists and funders and everyone else all in partnership is to improve cancer outcomes through our clinical research, and we want to give young people like these the opportunity for improved survival and reduced late effects of treatment as we go forward. So that's all I had to say about the NCRI. Thank you.